Hello everyone, and welcome to... Earth? That's right, Bill accidentally stepped through some kind of wormhole, and now he's found himself here, in our solar system. Because, as I said I would do at the end of the last video, I'm here to do the promised JUPITER-4 mission that I said I would do. Even though it only placed second in the poll that I had you guys answer behind the all-important task of saving Durkan Kerman. However, now that Durkan is back at home and shattering all weightlifting records, I can finally set my sights on reaching Jupiter and its moons once again. Now, something that's probably pretty important to note here is the fact that I've never actually played real solar system. Beyond just goofing around in Earth orbit a couple of times. Like, 5 years ago. Which means that I'm, in a way, kinda going into this mission blind, All I really know is that I need to match inclinations with my target planets because the whole system is tilted just to simulate Earth's axial tilt, which is kinda silly in my opinion, but whatever. And that I'll need a lot of Delta V. Like, even more Delta V than one needs to escape the police after finding out Obama's last name. Or, in other words, at least 14 meters per second.
Wow.
So, in order to achieve this ridiculous quantity of Delta V, I needed an equally ridiculous craft, which, while the weekend from the Plock video would have actually fit that bill, I don't want to just reuse a craft over again. That's just kinda... I don't know. Also, it's way too heavy and its lander isn't even sufficient anyways, so instead allow me to present to you the Octor Prime, which, with its ridiculous ion engine setup, will allow us to get pretty much anywhere. Eventually, come on, just give it some time. It's also named after the, in my opinion, underrated Pioneer 10 and 11 probes, except that the name is now in Latin to be, how do I put this? Legally distinct. Accompanying this craft is also our lander, which we will use to land on all 4 of the Galilean moons of Jupiter, with a single stage. The Marius, named after the German astronomer, Simon Marius, who named all 4 of them. Fun fact about these moons' names, actually. The modern names we have for them weren't actually used that commonly until about the mid-20th century. Before that, most people actually just simply refer to them as Jupiter 1, 2, 3, 4, which... it's just... huh? Anyways, back to the lander. This lander is pretty similar to the Plock lander in that it's pretty bare bones, but is arguably even more so, with no probe core or reaction wheels to speak of. The only control over the craft comes from its 2 spider engines, which, together with some tomfoolery, means that I can get over 4 kilometers per second of Delta V in about 1 ton. In fact, this whole setup is kinda configured to be very lightweight, as originally I was just going to use a design similar to the Weekend with nuclear engines, but decided to scrap this in order to avoid another 30 times moon mission situation, and also to save my PC from wanting me to throw it out my window. But hey, what are we waiting for? Let's stick it on a rocket and get going already, shall we?
Wait.
The launch itself was a little bit annoying to get right due to the rocket's tendency to start wobbling all over the place, as very tall craft often do, but after that was sorted, we then proceeded to low Earth orbit just fine. The only other noteworthy thing here that you may notice is that during the ascent I actually had to radial out quite a bit. Otherwise, I would have just gone straight past my apoapsis and just fallen back to Earth, which, would have been a little bit suboptimal. Even though I do have a mod that allows me to pick pretty much any launch site that I want, I also decided to embrace my inner Florida man and still launch from Cape Canaveral, because I'd still be able to match Jupiter's inclination from here almost as well as I would from an equatorial site like French Guiana. And also, America. Once Bill had reached low Earth orbit, I then started planning out how I was actually going to get to Jupiter. Obviously, given that we will be using atomic and later ion engines, our thrust-to-weight ratio is undesirable, which combined with the absurd delta V needed for a direct transfer to Jupiter, made things kinda complicated here. First, since my thrust-to-weight ratio is comparable to a cargo ship being tugged by a Citroen Aircross, I decided to split the burn into several different periapsis kicks over a period of multiple days, and once that was done, I set up a final maneuver node to transfer to... Venus? Yeah, that's right, we're doing gravity assist this time. Because, believe it or not, I don't exactly think doing a 7,000 meter per second burn would be fun, or practical, or interesting, or any of that. Anyways, once this burn was completed, Octor Prime then sped away from Earth, and soon enough, our planet was nothing more than an insignificant blue marble in the distance. A few months later, following a minor correction burn, Bill then made his flyby of Venus, setting him up for an encounter with the Earth in about 14 years. This first Earth assist was also actually unique in that it put the Octor Prime onto an orbit with a 2-to-1 resonance with Earth, meaning that following the encounter and a minor correction, it was slated to fly past the Earth again exactly 2 years later. It's actually a pretty standard gravity assist technique that people use to get to Joule from Kerbin in stock KSP. It's called the Eve-Kerbin-Kerbin chain. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to replicate that in real solar system. Following this flyby and another orbit which took Bill into the depths of the asteroid belt, he then found himself approaching the Earth once more. Except this time, we performed a short prograde burn at periapsis in order to get the extra kick we needed to reach Jupiter's orbit. After leaving Earth, Bill then coasted into this new orbit, where he remained for the next 35 years. Until finally, sometime in the year 2060, after another correction burn, the Octor Prime began making its approach to the ringleader of the planet cult, Jupiter. And, well, as you can tell, we're going very close to the planet because despite my best efforts, I couldn't seem to set up a gravity assist off of one of the moons that would allow me to get into the system for free, like you could do pretty easily with Lathe or Tylo in the stock game. And also the game crashed, so that didn't help. It's alright though, it means that Bill gets to enjoy more of those spicy particles. After then placing himself into an extremely eccentric orbit with a period of over a year, I then had Bill try and set up an encounter with Io, our first target. And that's when this happened. Alright then, Io, I see how it is. I'll just start with Callisto instead. Sheesh. Thankfully, Callisto was much more friendly to my PC, and after another burn, we made our way toward the most underrated Galilean moon in my opinion. And Bill also finally got a break from being irradiated, seeing as the radiation levels at Callisto are actually much lower than those found even in low Earth orbit thanks to Jupiter's powerful magnetic field. It's also the only Galilean moon not to be locked into resonance chain with the others, which I also think is kinda neat. However, before we could actually enter orbit of Callisto and land on it, we first had to fly past it a few times for gravity assists, seeing as we were still going way too fast. Once that was done, the Octor Prime fired up its engine and agonizingly slowly decelerated into orbit.
2,000 years later.
Just after the burn finally finished, Bill was then treated to a delightful view of Jupiter rising over the horizon. And also like 8 more circularization burns. Yeah, I'm not gonna bore you with those, don't worry. But how about we go ahead and land already, shall we? You know, Bill's only been waiting about 58 years for this. I think it's about time he actually set foot on solid ground again, so here we go. Landing on Callisto, believe it or not, is actually slightly easier than landing on Earth's moon due to the lower surface gravity, even though it's larger overall. In fact, because of this, I'd actually consider Callisto the second easiest Jovian moon to land on behind only Europa. Despite the low difficulty though, I didn't exactly make the most efficient descent here, resulting in me using up a little more fuel than I would have liked, or should have. You know, I think Bill's landing skills are probably a little bit rusty after 58 years of space travel. What can I say?
Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds forward, drift. Contact light.
Despite this, however, we made it, And that's what matters. Bill then excitedly stepped down onto the surface, planted Old Glory, God bless America, and took in the views of Jupiter looming in the distance. And after that, I then had him spend a whole Callistan day on the surface to line the orbit up with the Octa Prime, and with a puff of the engines, the Marius began its descent back into orbit. Where, of course, we had our rather uneventful rendezvous and docking. After the two skeletons of spacecraft had been reunited once more, we then began making our way down to Ganymede, Jupiter's largest moon and the largest in the entire solar system, complete with its own magnetic field and a larger radius than Mercury, which, of course, would probably make it the most difficult of the bunch to actually land on and return from. In designing the Marius lander, Ganymede was ultimately the limiting factor here that determined how much delta V I would actually need. Around 4,000 to 4,100 meters per second, give or take. I still wouldn't really consider Ganymede a challenging landing by any means, thanks to Ganymede's low gravity compared to something like even stock Tylo or Val. But it's enough of one that you still have to be somewhat careful during your descent. In terms of actually getting there though, that wasn't too difficult actually. It's pretty much a standard home-in transfer between Callisto and Ganymede, with actually a pretty comparable delta V transferring between something like Kerbin and Duna in the stock game.
The sun would be about 45 degrees.
Complete with another boring insertion burn, which I'll just skip past now because I don't think you want to see that, that's boring. And once a low Ganymede orbit had been achieved, Bill then refueled the Marius using fuel from the tank on board the Octa Prime, undocked it once more, and began his descent to the surface. As I previously mentioned, the descent here was probably the most difficult, with another notable thing being the fact that I have to radial out slightly. Otherwise my orbit would just decay faster than I could shed velocity and I would just crash. It's actually sort of like landing on Tylo and stock KSP in that regard. So, you know, maybe Tylo isn't actually such a poor Ganymede analog after all. Actually, no, they're still not really anything alike, are they? They've got about as much in common as an elephant has with a screaming, hairy armadillo. And, much like the armadillo, Bill was screaming with excitement as he touched down and disembarked from the Marius lander. However, these screams of excitement soon turned into concern when he realized something. He'd only brought along one flag. That wouldn't do. We can't just land and leave no evidence behind. People would just think we faked all of it, wouldn't they? Oh, wait a second. Yeah. Well, okay, more people would think that. It's okay though, just avert your eyes for a few seconds. Wow, look at that, a capsule magically appeared containing flags. Wow, what an accident. It's almost like none of this actually matters, but I just want the neuron activation of planting a flag. Once Bill had collected all of the flags that he needed, the mysterious craft then once again vanished, leaving Bill alone on the surface of Ganymede. Oh yeah, and he actually planted the flag. Wouldn't want to forget that now, would we? Bill then decided to rest up for a while until just before dawn the next morning, the Marius lifted back off into orbit, where everything went nominally. That is, until I had a minor heart attack upon realizing that I was headed straight into a mountain range because my orbit was too low. Thankfully, due to some quick radial out maneuvers, Bill was narrowly able to avoid becoming just another crater on the surface of Ganymede, although our orbit became pretty janky after the fact. Whatever, that's the Octa Prime's problem now, isn't it? And speaking of the Octa Prime, due to the fact that some of the lander's fuel has now been removed, it actually now has more Delta V than it had when it first arrived at Jupiter, which I find kinda hilarious. The two spacecraft then docked once more, and Bill then set his sights on Europa, the smallest and probably most famous of the Galilean moons because of, you know, the ocean and the possibility of extraterrestrial life and all. Actually, Ganymede and Callisto might also have oceans, but people don't really talk about that as much for some reason. Anyways, I don't know, I guess Europa's kind of like stock KSP's Lathe in a way, in that, you know, it has an ocean and it gets all the attention. Reaching Europa from Ganymede also featured the most Delta V of any of the transfers so far, as the orbital velocities are increasing the closer we get to Jupiter. As for what that means for Io, well, you'll see. I can't even imagine how much harder this mission would have been if RSS had Jupiter's inner moons like Metis or Amalthea. That would have been a Herculean task to reach them, let's put it that way. Like Metis, the closest moon to Jupiter, orbits the planet almost as fast as Earth's orbit around the Sun. That's how quick it is. Because Jupiter's gravity is just that powerful that close to the planet. I mean, you kind of already saw it when I first entered Jupiter's orbit, at which point I reached like 60 kilometers per second, which is absolutely nuts. However, something that's at least good about this burn is the fact that my thrust-to-weight ratio has actually improved considerably, thanks to the Marius' fuel being halfway depleted, so the burn didn't actually take that long this time. And speaking of fuel, of all the Galilean moons, Europa is actually the one that requires the least, thanks to its smaller size and lesser gravity. So, you know, Bill felt a bit more relaxed as he once again refueled the lander and set off on his journey down to the surface. Alright, Bill, don't be cocky now. I mean, not that he would have time to be cocky, as he was scared back to his senses by the appearance of the dreaded spatial anomaly, which followed the Marius all the way down to Europa's surface. Once Bill had set down on the icy moon's crust, it seemed as if the pursuit had ended, and he then proceeded with the mission as normal, planting another flag from the mysterious disappearing capsule. However, upon turning around, the spatial anomaly continued to loom above the surface, taunting us.
3, 2, 1, go!
Until Bill heroically vanquished it by pulling out his tool. Amazing. Epic boss fight. Good job, Bill. Triumphantly, the victorious Bill then walked back to his lander and quickly lifted back off of the surface, for fear that the anomaly may return with a vengeance. After reaching orbit once more, it was then a pretty standard rendezvous procedure, and just like that, we were left with only one more moon to conquer, the volcanic, radiation-bathed hellscape of Io. Among the most hostile worlds in the entire solar system, sitting right in the middle of Jupiter's radiation belts, with levels so high they'd be lethal to a human within hours. Then again, I guess that's still better than Venus. But seriously, someone should try and calculate the total amount of radiation that Bill would have been exposed to during this mission. That'd actually be quite funny. Luckily for us, Bill is a Kerbal, and Kerbals care not for feeble things such as radiation poisoning, or needing food, or water, or God forbid, politics. Yuck. Oh yeah, I also once saw Io described as a radiation-cooked cheese pizza, which I thought was the funniest thing ever.
What?
Io's also got the highest surface gravity of any of Jupiter's moons, or actually any moon in the solar system for that matter, so landing here will be among the most difficult, rivaling Ganymede itself. However, before we can do that, we still have to get there, and the super long insertion burn I had to do very much reminded me of going to Moho in stock KSP. During this burn, however, this happened. Yeah, okay, I set the periapsis too low, alright? I don't want to talk about it. Reload. I'll just blame it on the spatial anomaly. You guys will believe that, right? And one reload and another lengthy burn later, the Octo Prime reached orbit around Io, and after some more thrilling circularizations, it was time for the final landing of the mission. The landing on the radiation-cooked cheese pizza itself. Godspeed, Bill. And, just like that, after his treacherous descent, Bill had touched down on Io. Wait, hold on a second. Why does the ground look like Minecraft? Alright, let's just reload. Okay, that's better. Bill then set foot on the newly depixelated ground, and after walking around for a bit, planted our last flag, in which he inscribed this most helpful plaque. I love radiation doses that rival those in Chernobyl, am I right? Charged particles really stimulate the nervous system, man. You will get cancer from this, but don't worry. Your cancer will also get cancer, and they will cancel each other out, trust me guys. And taking this knowledge to heart, Bill then spent an entire day on the surface of Io before lifting off again. Yeah, that's right, look how healthy he is, look how stimulated he is. Anybody who says radiation is bad for you is simply spreading misinformation. It's not true. And as he lifted off, he took the Marius back into orbit for the final time. And indeed, low Io orbit is sadly the Marius' final destination, as once the Octo Prime had reached it again, I had Bill go ahead and move his command seat from the Marius onto the probe core of the Octo Prime, and the lander was then left to float off into space, much like Draggy McDraggington and the Moho Mole before it. This sacrificial operation also served to decrease the mass of the ship further, increasing our delta V to a ludicrous 21,000 meters per second, which is hilarious, and that is almost equal to the amount of delta V that I even started the mission with in low Earth orbit. So yeah, you know, I may have overestimated the delta V requirements of real solar system a little bit, I'll admit that much. Like seriously, if I wanted to, I probably could have taken this entire thing on a grand tour of the Saturn system too. You know, apart from Titan at least, and then some. However, even despite all of this, I then decided to still make my return efficient by using a lengthy gravity assist chain to lift the Octo Prime out of Jupiter's gravity well. After getting myself into an eccentric Io orbit, I then headed to Europa for a gravity assist, and, well actually, I think I'll just let the video do the rest of the talking here, because I don't think I've ever done this many gravity assists in a mission before. And only 8 gravity assists later, Bill finally found himself making his final ejection burn to return to Earth. In about 7 years' time, since Earth is currently on the complete wrong side of the sun, of course. But alas, he continued, and after a small plane correction, and even more agonizing space travel, the pale blue dot once more loomed before us. As it grew ever larger in Bill's field of view, he then executed the final major directive of his mission, to rearrange the spacecraft so that he would only have to descend on the heat shield, instead of riding a ballistic missile into Earth's atmosphere at 14 kilometers per second. That's right, NASA said quit having fun, okay? And once that had been completed, it was then a simple matter of coasting all the way until we hit Earth's atmosphere, and the inferno began. And a few minutes later, Bill then safely splashed down in the South Atlantic, narrowly avoiding the worst fate possible, landing in Brazil.
We're going to Brazil!
Spared from this fate, he then was recovered, completing a 68-year journey, which, honestly could have been like 6 years, but, efficiency, I guess. Anyways, this concludes my first real mission in the real solar system mod, which honestly turned out to not be nearly as hard as I thought it would be. I don't know, maybe I'll do more missions with it in the future, like going to, say, Mercury or something. But until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time, dweebs. Except no. That's not actually what happened. You really think Bill got sponsored by the US government and spent decades going to Jupiter just to explore its moons? No. That's merely the cover story in a sideshow. What Bill really set out to do was something much greater. Returning home.